Ronald Reagan once said, "The fact is, we'll never build a lasting economic recovery by going deeper into debt at a faster rate than we have before." Due to the combination of COVID-19 and Hurricane Dorian, the country has been in a concerning economic state. Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm your guest host, Jessica Robertson. The country's debt is expected to reach $10.8 billion, thus capturing 98% of the country's gross domestic product. Moreover, with the recent Moody's downgrade and the country scrambling to pay that debt, the question is, what can be done to help our economic recovery, and what role will the reduction of VAT play? Tonight, joining me is an expert in the field of economics as we discuss managing the economic recovery.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.
Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your guest host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we're discussing managing economic recovery. Fulfilling one of its first major campaign promises, the new Davis administration has announced a reduction in VAT from 12% to 10%. However, along with that came the revelation that the same 10% will now be added to a number of items that previously bore no VAT at all. Former Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest stated that the implementation of value-added tax on breadbasket items would now cause the tax burden on the wealthy to be shifted to the poor. Moreover, many are concerned about the addition of VAT to medical supplies. With all of these added stipulations, many are wondering what effect the lowering of VAT will have on the economy and on their pockets. My guest for this segment of the show is no stranger to economics. Joining us tonight is Senator Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for coming us. Let's just jump right in. What role does VAT play on the overall economy from a government's point of view?
From a government's point of view, VAT is very important and a very important part of our economic recovery program. A bit of context. In March 2021, the Progressive Liberal Party published an economic plan called Recover, Rebuild, Revolutionize. And under that plan, we promised to bring immediate relief, to stabilize the public finances, and to kickstart the economy and create jobs. And so, fast forward now to October 27th, 2021, the Prime Minister Davis lays in the House the supplementary budget. As part of that budget was several elements of providing immediate relief. Amongst those were increases in public service pensions. Those, for example, those pensioners who were earning $500 or less per month as a pension, they would see an increase of $100. Those who were receiving a pension of between $500 and $1,000, they would get an increase of $75 per month. And those earning over $1,000 would see an increase of $50 per month. At the same time, the Prime Minister announced the extension of the special unemployment program at National Insurance, which was to expire in September of this year. That has been extended to December. And in December, those in the program would receive a $500 payment. And so that's bringing immediate relief. Along with that, and what has gotten most of the focus, is the reduction in VAT from 12% to 10% across the board. Again, this was a promise made in the economic plan back in March. We want to say, first of all, that it's an across-the-board decrease. So everything that currently attracts VAT at 12% will now attract VAT at 10%. So it's a cut in the rate of VAT. So all your grocery items other than the bread basket, and I'll talk about the bread basket. So when you're talking about meats, chicken, pork chop, in terms of groceries, if you go to the store, the clothing store, if you buy a beverage, if you get a takeout meal, car parts, you're buying a new or used car, you'll see your car insurance bill go down. All of those things that currently attract VAT at 12% that will be cut to 10%. You are correct, a lot of the focus has been on the elimination of the VAT-free status of particularly the bread basket items. And we understand that concern, particularly amongst people who are struggling at this time. But our belief is, and the evidence shows, that with an overall cut in VAT throughout the economy, in goods and services, from 12% to 10%, even with the elimination of those exempt items, you would see a decrease in your overall tax bill. So we invite Bahamians to look at the overall picture, examine what you spend your money on, and I think they will realize that this cut from 12 to 10 will result in a decrease in the overall tax bill. And our belief is that this will leave more money in the pockets of Bahamians. It will give them more money to spend elsewhere or invest or save, and that it will be good for the economy. And we are backed up on this. When we did this decrease, we asked the University of the Bahamas to do a model for us, and their model has said that this will be a positive impact on the economy, and that if we combine this with some of the other elements of our plan, particularly revenue enhancement, doing a better job of collecting the taxes that are due, that are not being collected efficiently, if we combine those two, then it would be a positive impact on the economy. So to that point, I would say that we understand that people might be concerned, but our research has shown, for example, that even within the grocery store, the amount of money, the percentage of the grocery bill for bread basket items is around 25%, and everything else is about 75%. So you'll see a reduction on 75% of your bill, and those 20% items will no longer be VAT-free. So overall, we think when you take the overall picture, look at services that you consume and all other goods that you purchase other than those items that were previously VAT-free, there'll be a savings.
And that obviously is for the average person,
Yes.
but there is an understanding that there are some people who they buy what they buy because
Yes.
it has
Yes.
no VAT.
Yes. Yes.
How do you convince those people that this is a good thing?
It's a good thing because a very important part of your taxation system, and even bringing relief and benefits or exemptions to people, is that you want to be targeted. So for example, all the research has shown that the best way to target those who are struggling, those who are vulnerable, is to give them a direct assistance. So instead of exempting a whole category of goods, which admittedly those vulnerable people would get the benefit of, but the people who are in a better position to pay, businesses who are in a better position to pay, will also get that benefit. So for example, we are advised that the biggest consumer of bread, for example, are the takeout businesses. And so whereas you might say, okay, if we exempt bread, we are helping the vulnerable, more of that help goes to big business. So the best way to help those people who are most vulnerable, those who are struggling, is to give them a direct assistance. And part of our plan is the reintroduction of the RISE program through the Department of Social Services, where there's a direct cash assistance to those who are most vulnerable. They can get the assistance, and then they can spend it any way they want. So understanding it can tend to be, well, other than being very realistic and very real for people, it's a very emotive argument. But our experience, and we've seen this in the experience, is that it is better to have a simplified system where there are minimal exemptions, a one rate, and you have better collection, your system is more efficient, and then because of that you collect more revenue, you have more funds at your disposal to give that direct assistance to those who are struggling right now.
So in your modeling, is the expectation that, let's go to the average person, that now that things are going to cost less in theory, that I will buy more things, so government will still make as much or more? How does this reduction help the public purse?
That is the theory. Number one, the reduction combined with the simplification by the elimination of the exemptions will make the job of the Department of Inland Revenue easier, in that there's less room for leakage and loopholes, and it makes the administration much easier. And that is borne out by a report that we recently received saying that before the introduction of the exemptions, the program was very efficient, in the mid-90s in terms of its effectiveness in generating revenue. After the introduction of the exemptions, that has dropped to 83%. So it's less efficient to do it this way. Now, I know I'm talking about efficiency and modeling and research, but the fact of the matter is, all of the research would tell you that it's more efficient, it's better for the economy to be able to have a simplified system which generates economic activity and provides you with more money to help those that are vulnerable. And you're right. What happens is because you are paying less in taxes, more money is left in your pocket. You can then make a decision on what to do with that. Either you spend it as well, you save it, you decide to invest it, but and it also gives you a break.
Do you expect that still to hold true, though, given that a lot of wholesalers, retailers are forecasting increases in pricing across the board? They're trying to hold off as much as they can, but the fact is, with the global supply chain and all of these issues globally, prices are going up. So at the end of the day, even with this reduction in VAT, am I, the consumer, going to have anything more in my pocket? You
will be in a better position. For example, if those global supply chain problems persist and VAT was still at 12%, you'll be in a worse position. We have been in some discussions and have been getting some information. The thinking is that those supply chain problems will eventually work themselves out. They tend to be more short-term, and so we're hopeful that those work themselves out. But the fact is that had we not cut VAT from 12 to 10, and we still have those global supply chain problems, we'll be in a worse position. So again, when we look at the total picture, we believe that it will be a net benefit, particularly to the consumer when they look at their total spending.
Is there any consideration being given? I remember when VAT was first introduced as a concept, the whole idea seemed to be that we're going to put VAT on and we're going to move import duties off the table. We were shifting. That hasn't happened. So in a lot of cases now, if I bring something in, I'm double taxed. I'm paying VAT on top of duty. Is there any consideration to furthering this move away from an import tax?
We have, in fact, when it was introduced in 2015, there was not a total elimination, but there were reductions in January of 2015 and as well in July of 2015, and I think some has gone on over the past years. It's a matter that we have to continually look at. The tax code is continually studied every year during the budget process. There are amendments that are made, adjustments that are made, suggestions coming forward from businesses or from fledgling industries that are trying to get established who want certain concessions. But that is something that we will continue to do. We expect that we are hopeful and we're optimistic about a good, strong upcoming tourism season. All of the indications from the airport, from the hotels, are that, and even from the cruise ships, are that there's a lot of pent-up demand and people want to travel to the Bahamas. We're hopeful that the trend in the lower infection rates continues, and we are hopeful that the trend in increased rates of vaccination continues as well, and so that we have a good, strong season. And we're hopeful that as we move forward, we get a better handle globally on this whole COVID pandemic, and so that we see our economy growing. We have in the Minister of Investments and Tourism, the Deputy Prime Minister, very aggressive in terms of going out and seeking foreign investment, and as well trying to make it easier in the Ministry of Economic Affairs for Bahamians to get into business. And so what I'm saying is the reduction combined with what looks to be a strong tourism season, combined with our efforts in terms of revenue enhancement, going out and making sure that the taxes are collected, we expect to see an improvement in our, if all goes to plan, according to plan, in our economic situation and our finances. And then we can begin to, again, look at things like continuing the reduction in the import duties, because that is a burden, and part of the movement to VAT was trying to improve that system.
Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left in this segment, so I may be opening a big kettle of fish here, but price control, how does that play into, we're expecting pricing globally to go up, price controls, what is your ministry looking at in terms of that? Is this something that we still need in this day and age?
It's something that you still need because there needs to be, and people, the Bahamian public, get some level of comfort out of knowing that, okay, there is an agency who is responsible for making sure that those items that fall within the ambit of price control, that is respected. We have to do a better job of making sure that we are visible and giving that comfort to the Bahamian public. In an ideal world, competition takes care of prices. If you don't like the price this place, you go to another place. But in a small country like this, and everything is imported, and over the years, there's been a sort of concentration, particularly in the grocery suppliers. There's still a need to be able to give the Bahamian people that level of comfort that, okay, here's the regulation, this is the limit of profit that you can get on these items after accounting for your costs, and there's someone actually policing it.
Okay. Well, there's more on the record after this break.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. I'm your guest host, Jessica Robertson. Tonight we're discussing managing economic recovery. On October 27th, Prime Minister Davis told Parliament that there is a $1 billion difference in the figures from the Minnis administration pre-economic report and the actual report. Add to this the fact that the country remains in a dire economic state due to the COVID pandemic and the economic shutdowns that were put in place. Despite this, the Davis administration's blueprint for change promises to rescue the economy. Well, welcome back, Senator Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs. So this $1 billion difference pre-economic, first of all, $1 billion, most of us can't wrap our head around how many zeros that is, but break this down first. What does that actually mean?
I'll tell you, I'll give you a bit of history on it. You know, the former administration passed something that they call they passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act. I think it was in 2018. And amongst other things, it requires that the government maintain its finances within certain parameters. It calls for the publishing of certain reports, like economic strategy report, different budget reports. It calls for the establishment of Fiscal Responsibility Council. And it also calls for a pre-election economic status report. There's been, as you know, over the many years, there's always allegation that that any incumbent administration will engage in just a lot of election spending in an effort to be re-elected. And so I think the theory behind this was that, and also you would also find that every incoming administration would say, we met these bills.
Right.
and so I think all of this was an effort to put in place a report that says, okay, before the election, here's the fiscal situation of the government. Here's, particularly with that report, here's how much we owe. And I think it was election was called on August 19th, 2021. Mm-hmm. And on, I think it was the 26th of August, about a week later, the deputy leader of the PLP and now Deputy Prime Minister, Chester Cooper, took the government to task, saying to them that according to this fiscal responsibility legislation, you're supposed to publish this report a certain amount of days before the election. The report had not been published. I think about 2 or 3 days later, a report was published. The Fiscal Responsibility Act in the schedule calls for certain things to be included in this report, including any contracts that the government has entered in since the last budget, any significant financial arrangements that the government has obligations to fulfill, and anything, then it was a catch-all, anything that the minister thinks would be significant. And so what we did was we also promised in our blueprint that within 15 days of being elected, we will present a status report to the country. And just to make sure that there was independence, we engaged one of the major accounting firms to examine the fiscal report that was presented, which showed that the government had obligations of, I think, $109 million, either 108 or 109, and to compare that against the legislation to make sure that everything that should be included has been included. And what they concluded in their report was that there are about $1 billion in obligations that were not included in that report, including some loans that are coming due, including some contracts that were signed that were not funded. And I must say that that report is being finalized, and it's the intent of the Prime Minister to lay it in Parliament so that people can see it. Having said that, I would say this, with a new administration, in my view, we have a new administration in. Those obligations are the obligations of the government of the Bahamas. We will have to honor those obligations that are legitimate. And so to the extent that it is financing that's coming due, we have to deal with that. To the extent that it's contracts that were signed but not funded, we'll have to phase those in, those that we want to continue with. And so government is continuous, and we'll have to honor those obligations. It will not stop us from implementing our plan, but it's just a matter of dealing with them and liquidating those over a period of time.
But surely it impacts your plan and your timelines if there's obligations that you weren't aware of.
Yeah.
What is your biggest concern as you look at just kind of what you're planning to do, what you've promised to do, and now what you're faced with?
One of our biggest concerns, I mean, even going in to the election and coming out, was our relationship with our creditors, people who lend us money, ensuring over the past few years there's been a tremendous amount of borrowing in foreign currency, in US dollars. In the short term, yes, you had to have that reaction because of circumstances, but it's unsustainable over the long term, because what you have to do is, of course, you have to pay those loans back in US dollars. You have to pay the interest in US dollars, you have to pay the loans back in US dollars. So all of our relationships with our creditors, and so, for example, if you have two big loans coming due, what we have to do is sit with them and work out a situation where we can refinance those, and the idea would be, sitting with them, coming to terms so that you can refinance, and so you fulfill that obligation. A big part of it,
and keep the reserves strong.
Keep the reserves strong, and a big part of it is we feel communication. So, for example, the Prime Minister said in the budget statement that over the past month and a half, we have been meeting with people like the banks, investors, those who have purchased our securities, the IMF, the World Bank, S&P, Moody's, the whole gamut, just to let them know, to inform them of our economic program, to let them know that this administration is committed to fiscal responsibility, fiscal transparency, all of it. We're committed to whatever reports that are due under the legislation, making sure that those are done, and having more of an engagement with the stakeholders so that they know what we're doing. And it's been, so far, it's been pretty positive. And so where we feel now that we have a better engagement now with our local financial institutions. We're looking to improve that. And a lot of it is communication and letting people know what our thinking is so that we can dispel any sort of misconceptions. And so it's a matter of scheduling. We've said repeatedly that this recovery is going to be a multi-annual recovery to get back to the pre-COVID levels. The good thing is that indications from the economy are strong, and so we feel that barring any setbacks, we'll be on a nice road to recovery as we go through the next few months.
Okay. Now, you have suggested in late October that capital expenses are going to be down by $54 million.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Well, what has happened is it's a function of budgeting. What happens is in the budget, let's say in the budget that was presented in May, that was passed in June of 2021, there were certain items that were put in for spending. When we look at it, when you're doing a capital project, it might cost, let's say, $20 million, but you won't spend the $20 million in that 1 year. You would spend some money on, if it's a building, you have to scope out the land, you have to prepare the land, you have to get approvals, you have to do things, the architectural drawings, all that takes time. And so if the total cost is 20, maybe in that first year you'll spend 5. And so what we did was in examining the budget, we realized that our capability to spend that money on those capital projects, we weren't in a position to be able to expend all of that. Doesn't mean that they're off the table for good. It means that now in this budget period, we're saying this is the amount of money that we expect to spend on that project. Next year, there'll be more. And if it goes into the next year, there'll be more. So on that point of capital expenditure, we believe that over the long term, because capital expenditure is actually investment, what that is by and large your buildings, your airports, your roads, your docks, and mostly infrastructure. And we believe that we should be spending about 3.5% of our budget on that regularly, because it represents investment in the economy, makes it easier for people to do business, et cetera. And so whereas you will see that dip, which is an adjustment on what we think can actually be spent this year, going forward, you should expect to see an increase in capital expenditure.
And historically, government hasn't done a really good job of taking care of our physical assets.
No, and
I'm being kind.
No, you're right. You're quite right. And there are some options on the table that have been discussed for a long time, and we're actually moving forward now to how do we actually take government assets and monetize them, meaning you have these assets, whether it's investments in certain companies, the government has share investments in a lot of companies, whether it's building, whether it's valuable real estate, how do you take those things? And there are ways, there are financial experts who can tell you that you can put those into a structure and manage it, inclusive of making sure that they are kept in good repair, et cetera. But you can manage it in order to generate some money. And those are some things we are looking forward to moving on.
Okay.
Not to divest the government of it, but put in place a mechanism where all those government assets that we have, they can be managed just how people, professional money managers, manage people's money.
Okay, okay. I want to look back at tax for a moment. You're making the change to that. When is that supposed to happen? Is it January?
January 1st.
Okay.
January 1st, it gives businesses an opportunity to make the adjustments.
All right.
And it's a nice, beginning of the year.
Right.
It's a nice clean.
Do businesses still have to put VAT on everything, or are we now this many years into having VAT at a point where we can do just like we do in Florida and say, I know that it costs $10, it's going to cost $10 plus 10%?
Exactly. I think it's in the original legislation, and I don't think it has changed. It's supposed to be inclusive on the shelf.
Right.
So the customer knows if I pick this up and it says $1.50, VAT has already been added.
I have to have $1.50 in my pocket.
Right. You don't go there
Right.
and then when you get to the cash register,
Right.
it's another 10% in this case. But we wanted to make sure that we give people an opportunity. We think it's a simple adjustment, but January 1st,
Okay.
it gives us an opportunity to, of course, pass it in
Right.
Parliament, pass it in the
Okay.
Senate, get it done, and,
Right.
and people have a short period
Right.
to make the adjustment.
So we're making this change, which, a lot of people will say is a good thing. However, VAT is still a regressive tax.
Yes.
And yet your blueprint for change talks about transforming the tax system to something that's more equitable, that
Yes.
doesn't hit the person who's struggling as much as it does the billionaire, and progressive. What are you looking at, and when can we expect to see this happen?
We are actually in the process now of having. There was a study that was begun. I think there was a pause in it, having it done to look at our entire taxation system. You may know that there's this push, particularly by the OECD, for what they call a 15% global minimum tax. And earlier this year, I don't remember exactly if it was in May but it was early in this year, the government at the time signed on to a no objection. And so what we have to do as part of that whole process is to look at the entire system. And so that is ongoing. And I know people, the hot topic will be income tax, but whereas, a progressive income tax is generally considered, progressive and more equitable than consumption taxes. I think that is a long conversation. I think it's been a long conversation. It's a hard conversation. But I think what we do is we begin by examining the whole system and looking at all of the options. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly amongst from the business community, of moving away from the business license fee over to a corporate tax, because you have some businesses in certain categories that generate a lot of revenue, but their margin is very small.
Right.
And so by charging them at the very beginning, they say they are disadvantaged because they would be better off if you would allow them to take into account some of their expenses and then charge them a rate on their profit. And so that's a discussion that we will continue. And I think I can say that before any changes are made, we will present all of the studies, all of the evidence, have a long discussion back and forth. But it is a conversation that's ongoing. But we will begin with this relief that we're putting in now.
So I guess really we've got a lot of things you're having to review, you're having to move. You've got a lot of balls in the air.
Yes, exactly. It's a busy, but it's an exciting time. I remember before the election, people were like, "Oh, do you guys really want this?" meaning, do you really want it? But it's a challenge. But it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity, for example, not only to build back, but build back better, like they say. For example, the whole COVID experience has forced a lot of people to become their own bosses, to go into to develop entrepreneurial opportunities. Now you have people they like. The fact that they don't have a 9-to-5, they like the fact that, okay, I've developed this business and I can continue it. And so our job is to, how do we make that easier? How do we support them? And so there's a lot of challenges, a lot of things to look at, because we have to, nobody thought, I don't think, that we would be under emergency orders for almost 2 years. No. And that you would have lockdowns, and that the world has changed so much. But it goes to show you that, we go to bed one night and we wake up the next day and the world has changed. And so how do we rebuild to be more resilient and to prepare as best we can for these things?
And you're back again, but in a whole different realm of,
yes.
of gameplay. So,
yes.
Well, when we come back, we're going to dig a little deeper into the blue, the green, and the orange economy. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this with our final segment.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.
Welcome back to On the Record. This is our final segment. I'm your guest host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we are continuing our conversation on managing economic recovery. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed flaws in economic systems worldwide. For the Bahamas, the tourism system that has kept us afloat for many, many years crumbled the moment we and other nations closed borders. More than ever before, though, the case for economic diversification is essential. The blue, green, and orange economy, once developed, could be another source of income for our otherwise tourism-dependent country. We welcome back to our final segment Senator Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs. So, Minister, one of the promises outlined in the PLP's 10-point plan is to encourage economic diversification.
Yes.
If I had $1 for every time I've heard, we
Yes.
need to diversify the economy.
Yes.
We all know this, but for the last 40 years, 40 plus years,
Yeah.
we've done little to make that happen.
Right.
We're talking about all these different colors now. What is the PLP's plan? How are you going to take this from being a campaign promise to something we actually see being done?
We'll begin to work and we'll engage all the stakeholders and partners. And you're quite correct. We've been talking about economic diversification for a long time. We've been talking about linkages for a long time. Linkages and creating linkages with the tourism economy. We've been talking about that for a very, very long time. Now the rubber has hit the road, so to speak. We have, as we said, we've seen a situation where the world has changed. I recall when we had the unfortunate incidents of 9/11, you saw a bit of a jolt to the population saying, oh, what if our food supply is interrupted for an extended period? What do we do? There was a bit of concern then, and then that petered away. And I think you saw a similar thing with, when we had the hurricane. But COVID has really been a game changer, so to speak. And so you've seen people, by necessity, gone into business, and you've seen, I think, an increased appreciation of the importance of growing our own food. And so when we talk about the orange economy, the creative economy, I think, well, just to take a step back, it's incumbent upon us to, first of all, recognize that the world has changed forever. We're hopeful, as I said, that the economy will bounce back, but we have to be mindful that, okay, should something like this happen again, we want to have different sources of income so that we're not as severely impacted.
So I think that's what happens is we say this,
Right.
we get this problem, we got to diversify, and then tourism rebounds and we're doing well, and so we continue, and we don't have to change.
And it's easier. And I'm thinking, and I'm optimistic that the mindset has changed, and so that having gone through this pandemic over the last 2 years, we have people now who are prepared, and I'm sure they always were, but who are even more prepared to say, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and that's what I'm going to pursue. And when we speak about entrepreneurship within the orange economy, you're talking about the creative economies, our creative artists, our singers, our actors, our artisans, people who create intellectual property. And I understand there is a group, there has been some work being going on before, and we will be reaching out to the stakeholders because we believe that, first of all, we need to be able to sit down and talk and then provide support. There are, if you look at in the region, you have performing artists that supersede their national boundaries. Right. We see it in Jamaica and Barbados and other places. We have some here, but it's our job to encourage them, find out from them what is the framework that we need to put in place so that they can get that support. And it'll be legislative as well to make sure that their intellectual property, their copyrights are protected, and they can monetize that and earn money. In terms of the green, dealing with food security, and we intend to continue to invest in BAMC to make sure that it fulfills its goals of training people in new methods, moving throughout the Family Islands, because we don't have to produce on the level of the mega producers in the US and Mexico and other places, but if we produce a premium product, we can get a premium price, I believe. There's a lot of discussion about organic and items grown close to or grown in particular specifications. And so again, how do we add value in that sector?
And how do we do that? Because in the U.S., I mean, it's heavily subsidized. Agriculture is heavily subsidized. So is this one where it's kind of a food security, but it's going to cost the economy? Where's that balance for you?
It's even here we're subsidized in terms of access to land and leases. I'm sure the farmers will tell you they need more. There's some level of subsidization here, but I think what we have to do is, again, and not to use any, the cliches, but find that niche where we can add some value. This is a product that is grown in the Bahamas under certain circumstances. It's processed here, and so it's not your regular can of tomato paste. It's organically grown in the Bahamas, processed, and that's worth something. And we have to continue, I think, the whole idea of encouraging people to have their backyard gardens.
A lot of that happened last year.
A lot of that happened, and it's still going on. If you look on social media, you see every day people boasting about their produce. And then not even fruits and veg, we're talking things like honey and, making jams and jellies and that sort of thing. And then how do we take that next step and improve and move to things like more farmers markets or community markets, and even the community gardens. And so on the national level, making the investment in BAMSI, continue to make the investment, making sure that they fulfill their obligation to teach people new methods. And with the blue economy, making sure that our economy is just, people coming here to fish or, sports fishing, but how do we derive a benefit by preserving our environment? There's the COP26 is the Prime Minister is just he's on his way back from that, and they're talking about carbon capture and eliminating emissions, and what opportunities do we have in terms of our oceans, and how can we use that to even generate revenue. Those are some discussions that are actually going on now. But of course, first and foremost is preserving the environment. We have a lot of marine protected areas. How do we utilize those, for example, to increase the numbers of people coming here to do research, et cetera. And so it's a matter of getting down, and I've been in already some preliminary discussions in terms of the blue with the University of the Bahamas. I've received some communication from some other research institutes who want to talk with the government, because with climate change being on top of the global agenda, this is a very opportune time to get into those discussions, and not only discussions, but begin to move, because you have people who are, you have experts who are able to let you have the benefit of their expertise, and it doesn't cost you anything, or you can actually derive money from it.
Interesting one. Cannabis.
Cannabis,
something that the last government kind of dipped its toe into, not very deep into the water. There's a proposal, a plan, I don't even know. There was talk about going ahead with medical marijuana, but is this a crop and an industry that the government is looking at as something that would be beneficial to the economy? I'm sure
I know there was a committee. I think they've reported, and so what we'll do is look at the report. The whole objective is, well, let me step back. Many countries are taking advantage of it. We are a bit late getting out of the gate. We have to make sure that we have in place the proper regulation and the legislation in place to monitor it, and we have to make sure it's not a situation where you have one or two big players come in and dominate, and the benefits don't really, I don't want to say trickle down, but are not widely spread. And so I'm sure that's something we're going to be looking at. I'm not sure of exactly where it is, but the whole idea is to make sure, number one, make sure we have discussions with all our stakeholders, and make sure that when we do have an industry, we have an industry that, what I would call the average Bahamian, the small, the average entrepreneur who wants to get involved, he's not prohibited from getting involved by large obstacles to entry.
Right, which often happens
yes,
here.
which often happens here. And again, and we're talking these things, but these are things we want to see happen because we believe, ultimately it would be to benefit. There's no use having a new the idea of new industries is so you have new entrants, so that the economic base can be widened and you have more participation. Makes no sense creating a new industry and having it concentrated and people are not getting the maximum benefit.
Yeah. Seems, historically, we get excited when a big player comes into the market and going to create this many jobs and this and that and the other. But how important are small businesses to the future of this country?
Critically important, because you are right. And we've all been guilty of getting excited about, coming in these thousands of people. But, the majority of the employment is with those individual small businesses who hire 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 people. It's very important, and that is why we have pledged to provide $50 million a year over 5 years to small business. We're supporting the Small Business Development Council. We're supporting the Bahamas Development Bank, the Venture Capital Fund, BAIC. Again, it's been a long-standing issue of how do you get all those elements to work together so that there's no duplication of effort and so that the money that we spend gets to those people that really need it. And so entrepreneurship is critically important because the government, there's a limit to how much they can do. I'm sure some of the big businesses, as they seek to recover, they won't get back to their pre-COVID levels. And so it's very important that business people are, even if they don't come for financing, they just need to know that, okay, if I need to get a business license or I need to get a permit, if I need to do this, that it's easy.
Right.
And so,
because it's not.
Because it's not. And again, that's part of the remit of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, ease of doing business, digitization of government services, and so we're continuing with that. And so it's a lot of challenge, but I think it's a lot of opportunity. But entrepreneurship is very important. Some people don't want to work for anybody anymore. Right. Some have always been entrepreneurs, and some have seen, for example, that, okay, COVID comes along, I don't like the way I was treated by my employer, I'm going to go and work for myself.
Or
and I like
all
it.
of a sudden, I've been furloughed and all I got is time to figure this out.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
To play around with it.
And people, particularly during the periods of lockdowns in 2020 and all through the second half of 2020 when there were extensive lockdowns, people have retooled and learned new skills and taken up courses and passed courses. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to give that level of support.
Create the framework.
Create that
and so
framework.
that's really what government should be doing, is making it possible, not doing it for us.
Making it possible and getting out of the way.
We like that. Something that, and this actually ties into, I want to switch gears a little bit, because this does obviously have an impact on small business and the consumer. Commercial banks in this country are, boy, that's probably a bigger topic than VAT.
Yeah.
We've had banks now saying, well, we're not giving you any interest. Our fees are up here. We're not giving you any interest. Obviously, from a government's point of view, you want people to save money, but I don't see any vehicles for it. Yeah. We talk about investment, but a lot of us aren't in the investment category. I think it was Central Bank Governor John Roll who said, well, it's not really his place to say how banks should run their business. What's government's take? Because Mia Motley in Barbados, she doesn't mince her words, she came out guns blazing against the commercial banks because they're doing the same thing in Barbados and said this is untenable. Right. What is this government's point and what can be done?
No doubt the banks have not enjoyed a good, in terms of public relations, a good relationship with the Bahamian public. The public feels that they're not getting the service. They're not getting the return, as evidenced by one of the banks publishing, zero. And they feel that they, for example, when they want to get into business, it's difficult getting into business. It's easier to get a salary deduction to buy a car, and you're saddled with high levels of debt. So that whole, relationship has not been good. There's a feeling that the banks have made a lot of profit, and as soon as things get rough, they begin to cut their losses and appear as if they want to abandon. And so I think what we have to do is make sure that particularly the people who want to save, and like you said, the average Bahamian they might have a few dollars in the bank, they don't have money to talk about buying shares when they become available or making a big investment. So we have to look at ways that products can be offered to the person with a few $100s or $1,000 in the bank, they can put it into an instrument and get some return. It doesn't have to be strictly in a savings account. It can be some sort of money market account, and those things can happen. And so I think we will be having that conversation. They will tell you that interest rates globally are low, but if you want to borrow money, the interest rates are high.
Isn't that funny?
All right, so that is a
Yeah.
that is a conversation we need to have the back and forth, so that we can put some options on the table, because like you said, not everybody is a sophisticated investor or is at that level to do so. And I think the key is in having products that someone, if you have a few dollars in the bank, you can say, okay, I have the special account that will give me some interest, because
or at least hold it and not just every month deplete it.
Yeah. Hold it, because every month, of course, there are fees, and if you're getting zero return but fees are coming out, your money is being eaten out. It's a losing proposition.
Yeah.
So that is something that we need to do as well. And then we need to encourage, and I think, I know as technology develops, you have digital banks, you have more people, interested in having and opening banks. So this is an ideal time to talk about the diversification in the industry,
right.
and creating more local institutions. You have your credit unions, and you have the Canadian banks that dominate the landscape, but perhaps now this is a time to talk about more indigenous, locally owned banks, who will be, perhaps a better understanding of the needs that we have
right.
here.
Okay.
So yeah, I thought that was, that created a firestorm when when that publication was made, and that is something as well that we will, you have to look at, because it affects a lot of people, and then in this sort of environment, when you're talking about zero, but yet charges, it doesn't go down well at all.
No. As a consumer, I look forward to that conversation happening. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record. Special thanks to my guest.
Thank you for having me.
And my technical and production staff. We'll see you again next week, same place, same time, On the Record.